Good morning, Peace Chapel. Two sermons today. I'm still going to get you guys out of here in about 45 minutes. I'm really humbled to talk about what it is that I'm going to talk about today. This entire series really has had my mind going. I told you guys whenever God gives me something to talk about, he sort of takes me through it. And so this whole mental health thing, God has really taken me through this so that I can really understand what it is that people go through that struggle with mental illness. It's something that I think we somewhat take lightly, and sometimes we can be a little bit insensitive towards those who struggle in this area. But I can tell you that the majority of us struggle when it comes to our thoughts. The majority of us struggle when it comes to our thoughts. And one of the reasons why I'm doing a series on mental illness is because I believe that the church has a responsibility to address an issue that's so common in our community, Amen. So common in our society. One to me, if I ever stand up here and speak to you any messages that don't speak to your life, that these are messages. When you come to church, you need to hear a message that speaks to your life. You need to hear something that's culturally relevant. And when it comes to the area of mental illness, that is something that is very, very relevant. And not only that, the Bible is not silent when it comes to the area of mental illness. And so, of course, we will be looking at the Bible today to, sort of verify the things that we're going to talk about. But I do want to show you guys some stats, just to show you guys just how common this whole mental illness thing is. Here are a few stats that I was able to gather together. And it shows that 43.8 million adults experience mental illness in a given year. 43.8 million adults struggle with mental illness in a given year. 1 in 5 youth ages 13 through 24 experience a severe mental disorder at some point during their life. That's a lot. 1 in 5. We have, at least 15 young people in this church. So that means out of the 15, 3 of them experience some sort of severe mental disorder at some point. 70% of youth in juvenile justice systems have at least one mental health condition. And I heard something, I don't know if this is a fact, but I heard something to this nature that the Twin Towers is one of the largest mental health institutions in the world. Right? So that goes to show you how well we've done as a society with addressing mental illness. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among youth ages 18 to 24. Double the number of homicide. Right? So double the number of people die from suicide than homicide in the ages of 18 through 24. 90% of those who committed suicide suffered from a mental illness. So there's a connection between suicide and mental illness. Over 80 million people are taking medications for a mental illness. That is a lot of people. Over 80 million people are taking a medication for mental illness. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. And so the most common of the mental illness issues or mental illnesses is depression. And so I want to define depression for you. Depression is a mood disorder that negatively affects how a person feels, thinks, and handles daily activities such as sleeping, eating, or working. And so it's very common, and when it comes to depression, there are levels to depression. There are some people who are mildly depressed, and there are some people who are clinically depressed. And we know, we've heard stories, we've seen some stories, we heard some stories last week of how when a person is depressed, it actually begins to affect their bodies. It affects the way they think, it affects the way they feel. Some people stop eating, some people start losing weight. Same thing with anxiety. It can make you feel as if you're having a heart attack. And so I want you guys to know, when it comes to mental illnesses has no respect of person.
Amen.
You can be black, you can be white, you can be rich, you can be poor, you can be popular. Nobody can know about you, and you still suffer from mental illness. It does not discriminate. Many of the celebrities that we idolize, many of the celebrities that we listen to, that we're entertained by, struggle with mental illness. And I want to show you guys just a few of them. Janet Jackson. Many people don't know, or many people did not know, that Janet Jackson struggled. She came out about her struggle with depression, but she's not the only one. Mariah Carey, that's more common. Many of us have heard about Mariah Carey's struggle with bipolar disorder. Ariana Grande struggles with PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress syndrome, and she struggles with anxiety. Very, very popular among our young people. Justin Bieber has, I think, close to 1 billion followers on Instagram. He's extremely popular, but Justin Bieber came out about his struggle with depression. The Rock, Dwayne Williams, I think his name Dwayne Johnson. We know him as The Rock, very popular on TV. He started off in the WWF, but he's a very popular actor today. He came out about his struggle with depression, and he also talked about in his story about how his mom committed suicide, and that really, really brought him down. And then Prince Harry. He talks about his struggle with emotional shutdowns. This is Prince, he's very popular in England, all across the world, but even him, he struggled with emotional issues. And then Selena Gomez struggles with anxiety, panic attacks, and depression. Kevin Love, famous basketball player, just signed a multi-year contract for multiple millions of dollars. Talks about his struggle with panic attacks. And then this couple right here, I have a great deal of respect for them. They actually lost their son. He committed suicide after his long-fought battle with mental illness. And so this mental illness thing is no respect of person. And a lot of times we think that, if you're a Christian, you're immune to this, but Christians experience mental illnesses as well, and we see it all throughout the Bible. I thank God for the Bible. I know a lot of people don't believe the Bible, but I thank God for the Bible because the Bible has real people who had real issues, and they serve as an example for us. The Bible is not made up of a bunch of characters that had it all together. They had real issues just like you and I. And here are some of the Bible characters that struggled with mental illness. We see David, he had anxiety. You can see it all throughout his writings in the Psalms. He struggled with bipolar disorder. He talked about stress. Oftentimes you can see that he was stressed. He felt like sometimes that people were trying to kill him, that he was being attacked, he was being followed. We know Job. Job struggled with depression when he lost all of his family, when he lost all of his valuable things. He struggled with depression. Elijah, we're going to look at his story next week. He wanted to kill himself. His depression was so bad. Cain, he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. We're going to look at his story a little bit today. Jonah was depressed. He had suicidal thoughts. He wanted to kill himself. He wanted to die. These are famous Bible characters. King Nebuchadnezzar, we're going to look at his story a little bit today. And then Hannah, she suffered from depression. Now, when it comes to mental illnesses, there are basically two schools of thoughts when it comes to mental illness, right? This question came up in our life group. Is there a difference between the brain and the mind? That was a question that I posed to our life group. Is there a difference between the brain and the mind? And there are two schools of thoughts when it comes to this. One school of thought is called physicalism. Physicalism believes that the brain and the mind are one. All right? So based on that belief, that's how they approach dealing with mental issues. Dualism believes that the brain and the mind are separate. All right? Those are secular views when it comes to the mind and the body and how we view things. Now, the Bible has a different view. The Bible has a different view. When you look through the Bible, it is very clear that the Bible teaches that man has at least three parts, and all three of these parts are connected. All three of these parts are connected. Man has three parts. Man has a soul. The soul is where the mind lives. The soul is where we reason. The soul is where our conscience is at. The soul is where our emotions are, right? The Bible often talks about the heart. And the heart is not that thing that beats in our chest. It's talking about that place where we reason and make decisions. But the Bible also talks about a physical body. And if you look to the right of you and you look to the left of you, that's a real person. That's a physical body that you're looking at, right? And this physical body has a brain. This physical body has eyes. This physical body has hands, right? And so the Bible talks about a physical body, but the Bible also talks about a spirit. That each person has a spirit. And the spirit, for the believer, the spirit is how God communicates to us. The spirit is how God communicates his truth to us, but it's also how God reveals or utilizes his power. He works his power through our spirit. Now, here's where the body and the mind and the soul are connected. If anyone is unhealthy, all will be unhealthy. If the soul is not healthy, it will affect the body. If the spirit is not healthy, it will affect the soul and the body. For the believer, those who have placed their trust in Jesus Christ, you were born again. That means you received a new spirit. This spirit that you received is the spirit of Jesus Christ. That spirit is perfect. However, there are often disconnects between the spirit and the soul and the body. And when there's a disconnect between the spirit, the soul, and the body, you have mental health issues. I don't know everything about this. There are some things that I do not understand about this. And I'll be candid with you guys. If I don't understand it, I'm going to let you know I do not completely understand it. Because the body and the soul are connected, I believe that there are people who are born with damage to their brain that makes them more susceptible to certain mental illness conditions. I want you guys to think about this for a minute. Just like when there is trauma or damage to the brain, it affects the way the body works. You guys know this, right? If there is something damaging to the brain, it can affect your hand moving. That's why when people have strokes, they get paralyzed, right? Because there is damage to the brain. I believe that there can be damage to the brain that makes some people more susceptible to mental illnesses such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and any other mental illness condition. But I believe also that those statistics that we looked at of people who were diagnosed with these mental illnesses are over-exaggerated statistics. I believe believe that, and again, I don't want to be insensitive towards what people go through. I believe that the vast majority of the mental issues in our society today are overdiagnosed. Because the people who approach this from the standpoint that the body and the mind are one, what they leave out is God, the Creator.
Amen.
And so we overdiagnose people, but we undervalue the importance or the connection of God in this whole mental health thing. And so whether you believe in the Bible or not, there are a lot of books out there that talk about the origin of man, the beginning of man, and how we got here. Whether you believe in the Bible or not, the Bible does address the origin of man. The Bible does talk about how man arrived here on earth. And so we're going to look at some stuff in the book of Genesis. And when we look at this, I don't want you to think the Bible. Just for a moment, I want you to get this out of your head. Don't think the Bible. I want you to think a historical document. A historical document that existed for many, many, many years. This was a historical document that talks about or chronicles the origin of the Jewish nation. And it was so important to them that they guarded it and they protected it with everything that they had in them, right? And when they would pass it down from one generation to the next generation, they made sure that it was copied meticulously. It would be like you taking a picture of you receiving a picture of your great-great-great-grandmother that you received from your grandmother, who received it from her grandmother, who received it from her grandmother, and it's been preserved, and it's in this photo album that's been protected and passed down from generation to generation. That's this document that we have called Genesis, that ultimately became a part of the Jewish Bible, and then it was combined with other New Testament documents, and it made up what we have today as our English Bible. And so it's something that has been guarded meticulously, it's been protected, it's been preserved, and it's something that is very reliable. The Jews will stake their lives on this particular document. In this document, the first sentence in this document in Genesis chapter 1, it says this: in the beginning, when there was nothing, and then all of a sudden there became something. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, whether you believe in God or not, at least hear this whole thing out, because I believe that this is the answer to a lot of the mental health issues that we see in our society today. And so this book, Genesis, it talks about in the beginning, God creating the heavens and the earth. It talks about God creating the heavens and the earth in 6 literal days, and he rested on the 7th day. But at the crown of his creation, after he created everything and declared that it was good, he created mankind. Right? And that's also documented for us in this book of Genesis. And then God said, let us make mankind in our image. Right? In our image. In our likeness. So that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And so at the crown of God's creation, he creates mankind, and he creates mankind and gives mankind this responsibility to rule over his creation, to steward his creation. But then something happens. Something happens. First of all, God warns. He warns mankind. He says, you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will certainly die. Now, I don't believe this warning that God gives to mankind has a whole lot to do with the tree. I believe it has more to do with mankind trusting his Creator.
Amen.
That God says, I trust you to steward my creation, that I created good, but I want you to trust me in return. So he said, the moment you eat of this tree, you will certainly die. And this is very important in us understanding mental illness, because something happens. They start listening to something that God created, that God gave them dominion over. They started listening to it. And Satan comes along and he says, you will not certainly die. He's talking to the woman. He says, you will not certainly die, but God said you will die. And so are you going to listen to your Creator, or are you going to listen to a snake? Eve decided, not you Eve, this other Eve decided to listen to the snake. The snake tricks her, right? For God knows that when you eat from this, your eyes will be open and you will be able to see good from evil. You will know and understand good and evil. In other words, God is holding something back from you. God is holding something back from you. Very common today, a very common tactic of the enemy today, that God is holding something back to you. Then the man got, this is after they disobey God. They disobey God, listening to the serpent, and something happens. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Now mind you, this is the relationship that they have with God. They have perfect fellowship with God, right? God is coming down, he's checking on them, he's conversating with them. They hear God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, and they hid from him. They hid from the Lord. They hid from God. They're hiding from God amongst the trees that God created. This, beloved, is our first introduction to mental illness.
Wow.
It happened in the book of Genesis. If they were to walk into any medical facility today and say that they're running around hiding from people, they would be diagnosed with a mental illness.
Wow.
And the one who believes or approaches this from the standpoint that the mind and the body are one would prescribe them some medication to deal with their mental illness.
Amen.
But you and I know, based on the story, that the issue has nothing to do with medication.
Amen. Amen.
The issue has more to do with disobedience. Are you guys with me? I promise you I'm going somewhere with this, and if you stay with me, you're going to get it. Don't check out, because I'm going somewhere with this. I'm building an argument, and it's going to make sense. And if you get this, you're not going to be overdiagnosing people, and you're not going to be overdiagnosing yourself.
Wow.
This is the first indication of mental illness. Paul, looking back on this account in Genesis, over 3,000 years later, he talks about this event, and he calls the disobedience sin. Paul does something very interesting. He does something very interesting. I want you guys to stay with me. Paul talks about sin. This word sin is disobedience. He talks about sin as if it's a noun. He talks about sin as if it's a thing. He literally personifies sin. Look at what Paul says. He says, I'm sorry, go ahead. I missed that. He personifies sin. He says, when Adam sinned, sin entered the world. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Now, what Paul does is he actually explains this in terms that you and I can understand. What Paul is saying is that we have characteristics like our parents. That there are certain things about me that's just like my father. That I have certain ways that are just like my father's ways. And I know children who have never been around their parents, but they're still just like their parents because there are things that are passed down to us through our DNA. And that's what Paul is talking about right here. Paul says when Adam sinned, sin entered the world. And so he personifies sin, and he says at one point in time, there was no such thing as sin. But then when Adam sinned, he's talking about the event that happened in the garden, when he disobeyed God, when he stopped trusting God. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world like a disease. And so because Adam was the first human being ever created, when Adam sinned, listen to this is not going to sound fair, but it's the truth. When Adam sinned, it was just as if we all sinned.
Amen. Amen.
Are you guys with me?
Speak, God.
What he's saying is that when Adam sinned, sin entered the world like a disease, and it affected every single human being. And we can confirm that. We can confirm that by the next events that happened in the book of Genesis, because Adam and Eve had children. 2 children, Cain and Abel, are recorded for us in the book of Genesis. All right, now, Cain has an issue with his brother Abel because he's jealous of his brother, because his brother's offering is acceptable to God, and for whatever reason, God is not accepting his offering. That means that God does not accept everybody's worship. That's a whole nother message. But I want you guys to understand that God does not have to accept our worship. God does not accept Cain's worship, and Cain becomes angry. He becomes bitter. He becomes frustrated. His emotions begin to get the best of him. God is still communing with his creation, and God says to Cain, if you do what is right, come on now. This is a warning. If you do what is right, you will you not be accepted? Wow. Cain is struggling emotionally. Cain is struggling emotionally. If Cain was to walk into a hospital, more than likely they would give Cain some medication. But God says, look, God says without any medication, God says if you do what is right, if you do what is right, it's your choice. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? Now look, watch the warning. But if you do not do what is right, okay, you have a choice. You're not a robot. Right. There's nobody in this room. Nobody in this room is a robot. He said, but if you do not do what is right, look at this. Sin. Sin. Not no person that's following you. Sin. Not the 2 personalities that you think is going on in your head. Sin. Sin. He's personifying sin again. He says sin is crouching at your door, right? Right at the door of your heart. Sin is waiting for an opportunity to seize you. Wow. To make your emotional issues a mental health illness. That is what sin is looking to do. It desires to have you, don't check out. Get off your phones, pay attention. I'm telling you, I'm going somewhere with this. It desires to have you. All right. It desires for you to completely give into it. Yeah. It desires for you to just throw in the towel. All hope is lost. It's going to be this way forever. Things are never going to change. Sin is crouching at your door. Look, but you must rule over it. Yeah. There you go. See, he's going back to the whole dominion thing, right? He's going back to the whole dominion thing. Why would God say you must rule over it if you couldn't? Some people would have you to believe that you can't rule over it. Some people would have you to believe that you're hopeless, that your situation is never going to change, that there's nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can do is take medication. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't people who need medication. As I pointed out in the beginning, I do believe that there's trauma that takes place in the brain that makes it almost impossible for people to cope with life without some sort of help, right? But he said you must rule over it. So Cain, that's the warning, Cain